As someone who's heavily invested in the Zelda franchise, I for one really love the stories presented in Zelda games. In my opinion, the Zelda stories are a very integral part of what makes the game so memorable in the first place. Games like Twilight Princess are very story heavy and half of the reason why I like the game so much in the first place. If not, I definitely wouldn't have gone through the 2+ hours it took to get to the first dungeon. Stories are very important to me in creating a memorable experience, and a huge part of what makes a good story is the lore. Lore is basically the history of something inside of a piece of media and is not typically spoken or shown. Something like a character's backstory or the history of a town you visit. Zelda lore is very intricate. Depending on the game, something can mean many different things. There are a lot of constants in the Zelda lore and a lot of things that can change. This lore has been built up for a very long time, even extending out to an entire timeline that actually makes sense when you think about it for more than 5 seconds. Now, how long would you suppose it takes to completely get rid of everything established beforehand in turn for something so much worse, to the point where it makes no sense? It didn't take very long. It was all destroyed in a single game. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is known for a lot of things. Some good, some bad, and some just baffling. Despite what some really well written and thought out 3-hour-long videos will tell you, I still think this game is pretty alright. Really well written. Really well written. God, that's really hard to say fast. But despite this game's overall quality, there are a magnitude of problems that prevent me from liking this game more than its younger brother, Breath of the Wild. And there's something that's been bothering me so much that I decided to go back to this game and make another video on it. That being the story and, well, overall, the lore of Tears of the Kingdom and how it completely ruined Zelda lore as a whole. This one simple game somehow managed to ruin years upon years of speculation and world building within the first 5 minutes of the game. And every time I think about this game's lore, I get angry, so, hopefully writing out a video like this can put my mind at ease. This video serves as a pseudo-sequel of sorts to my second most popular video on the channel, where I do a general comparison of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, so if you haven't watched that video, I do briefly talk about the story in that game, and this video is the follow-up to better explain some points I made and touch on some that I haven't made yet, and despite what a lot of the comments will tell you, no, it's not out of nostalgia. The only thing that I'm really nostalgic for right now is the drawing on this week's thumbnail art, which is available for download for my newly open channel memberships. For as little as $3 a month, you can get shoutouts at the end of my videos, custom emojis to use during my live streams, and of course, access to my members only chat on Discord, where you can get high quality downloads of the art I publish on my videos. So, if that interests you, make sure to of course click the join button below. But I've wasted enough of your time. Let's discuss. So, before I can get into Tears and the story presents, we have to do a little bit of digging first. This game is a sequel to Breath of the Wild after all, so I think it's worthwhile to at least gloss over some things that Breath of the Wild did lore and story-wise to compare to Tears of the Kingdom. I know that's gonna scare some people. I'm not going to spend the whole video comparing these two games again, but it's just, the closest comparison that I can make at the moment since they are a duology. Breath of the Wild was built on its world. It's the very foundation of everything else that comes in the game, as the environment around you can tell a story without having any real relevance. You can tell how the calamity of 100 years ago went down just by wandering around Hyrule Fields and seeing the damage for yourself. Of course, there is a real story present through the memories, but even by not looking at any of those cutscenes, which are technically optional, you get all the information you need just by walking around this barren wasteland. And this very wasteland is home to many things fans with a keen eye can spot out. Many locations from previous Zelda games show up in this game in many different spots, whether they be destroyed or not. Places such as Lon Lon Ranch making an appearance in this game, almost one-to-one with the original location. The Temple of Time is the first notable appearance of something like this, once again being ripped from Ocarina of Time and later on in Twilight Princess. However, you don't collect the Master Sword here like you do in other games. Instead, it's a giant goddess statue and serves as the jumping off point for the rest of the game, as the location is right where all of the shrines meet in an X formation. The Temple of Time and Lon Lon Ranch have little and no story relevance respectively and don't really impact the story in any way, shape, or form. Although there is a location that actually serves of major importance to the story and is ripped directly from another game. The Spring of Power in Breath of the Wild actually holds a cutscene that helps restore Link's memory, as it highlights Zelda's struggles with the previous Shrine of Courage and how she wishes she could unlock this power inside of her, but for some reason she just can't. It's a good scene that gives us great insight into Zelda's struggle as a character in this game, as she goes through one of the 3 shrines depicted by the Triforce: Courage, Power, and eventually Wisdom. However, the Shrine of Power has significant importance, as it is a shrine taken directly from the Legend of Zelda's Skyward Sword. The Earth Spring is a location in Skyward Sword that allows Link to travel through the Lanayru Desert. This spring is entirely intact within Breath of the Wild, and I don't think it's a coincidence that it is the way that it is. Common theories place Breath of the Wild at the end of the Zelda timeline, so having direct connections and locations from the very first game in the timeline helps further this theory. The springs of power, courage, and wisdom are very important locations in the story, and I think that we're meant to come to this spring in particular as it bears an exact resemblance to the Earth Spring in Skyward Sword, while the other springs are doing their own things. Some references can be their own thing, like a majority of locations in Breath of the Wild, they're just simple references to other characters and locations from across the series, but in name only. This, however, is the complete opposite. Different name, yet same place. Another location in Breath of the Wild ripped straight from Skyward Sword is the Forgotten Temple, a highly discussed location in the Zelda franchise, creating some of my favorite theories. The Forgotten Temple was deeply tied to the royal family, and had a lot of importance at one point, but has faded from people's memory. The guardians that are littered throughout the place were put there by the royal family in order to protect the facility. It's a very common Zelda trope for the royal family to have secrets they want to keep hidden. The Shadow Temple in Ocarina of Time is one of my favorite examples of those. The catacombs of the royal family were the walls are decorated with bones and reed-heads. Although it never had any relevance in the main plot, it was directly ripped from Skyward Sword, and the location being the sealed grounds. This place holds the largest goddess statue in the game and is one of the most important locations from Skyward Sword, and if we follow the Zelda lore correctly, this temple has been here since before Hyrule was even founded, so this place being named the Forgotten Temple makes a lot of sense, and fans ran with it, making amazing theories for years and years. Talking about all this isn't even mentioning the lore setup within Breath of the Wild itself. What I mean by this is the game creates a new and established lore within the world of Hyrule, things like the ancient Sheikah technology found before the Calamity, things like the shrines, the towers, the guardians, etc. And of course, one of the most hotly debated and interesting theories surrounding Breath of the Wild being the Zonai ruins. And if you don't believe me, just look at all the theories surrounding these guys back in the day. Hell, Nintendo Black Crisis made an entire hour-and-a-half long documentary putting the pieces together from Breath of the Wild. So, of course, when the first gameplay trailer was shown off for Tears of the Kingdom, when we saw that Link picked up what was called a Zonai charge, fans went fucking wild, only for Tears of the Kingdom to actually come out and elaborate on absolutely none of it. The Zonai and everything surrounding them was something I was heavily interested in when Tears of the Kingdom was releasing, and well, I was beyond disappointed. Even in my honeymoon phase, I was shocked at how poorly these characters were handled, and it plays a major part in how this game just kind of destroys Zelda lore. At this point, I'm just going to be recapping the beginning of Tears of the Kingdom, so for everyone's listening pleasure, I'm going to put on my epic dramatic reader voice. So the game itself starts with Link and Zelda heading under Hyrule Castle to investigate the source of a substance called gloom, which is a whole different can of worms on its own, but we'll get to that later. Judging by Zelda's reaction to certain things, we can judge that this is the first time they've actually been down here. The Master Sword starts glowing as it reacts to the gloom. Oh, there it is.
This is similar to the statues we saw earlier, a Zonai. And these figures look like Hylians. This depiction certainly suggests that the Zonai descended from the heavens. It is said that my ancestors, the first of Hyrule's royal family, were born from a union with gods who had descended from the heavens. These murals tell a similar story, and if they are accurate, then the gods mentioned were the Zonai. They must have forged a relationship with the Hylians of that time, working together to establish the Kingdom of Hyrule.
It took us 6 years to get here, and this is pretty much all that we ever get relating to the Zonai and what they did in the past. I mean, sure, Zelda even goes to the past itself, where we have a chance to see what the Zonai were like, but we only have Rauru and his sister, and Hyrule was already established, so, you know, we don't even get to see anything relating to who they are or their culture other than architecture and the constructs. Okay, cool. I mean, this isn't necessarily a bad thing on its own, but once again, the Zonai were one of the theories that people talked about the most in Zelda, and the beginning dump is pretty much all we get in terms of who the Zonai even were. An hour-and-a-half long theory. You know, that's probably how much time Nintendo actually put thought into the Zonai itself, but whatever. Upon playing through for the first time, this is very intriguing, mainly because we don't know what's coming next, and this just feels like a tease for what's to come, but no, you get the exact same cutscenes 4 times. Fuck you! Sorry, I'm still getting ahead of myself, believe it or not. Let's go back. Zelda and Link find Ganondorf sealed under Hyrule Castle. He awakens, and the upheaval happens, and Link wakes up on the Great Sky Island. When we touch down on the ground, we're met with a few different ways to go. I mean, at this point, we can go wherever we want, but I would rather follow the story, and Lookout Landing is where we need to go. Talking to Purah, she sets us up with a new tower system that lets us collect the map data we need to go where we're going, and, wait a minute. Where the hell is the Sheikah Tech? Well, I wish I had an answer for you because it looks like no one in Hyrule fucking remembers or cares, because outside of a few times where we can actually see the remnants of the tech, it is never mentioned again, which baffles me to no end. Breath of the Wild went out of its way to tell the player where the Sheikah Tech came from, what its purpose was, and how important it was to the story. By the way, it's very important. Sheikah Tech was the very foundation of Breath of the Wild's lore and its story. You could never get away from this stuff. Sheikah Tech for the shrines, Sheikah Tech for the towers, the guardians, the dungeons, the toilet paper I wipe my ass with. This stuff was everywhere like crack in the 80s. So where'd it go in Tears of the Kingdom?
The Sheikah Tech disappeared after the Calamity was sealed. All of the people of Hyrule also witnessed this, but there is no one who knows the mechanism or reason why they disappeared, and it is considered a mystery. It is believed that since the Calamity disappeared, they also disappeared as their role had been fulfilled.
Oh, fuck off. No, they didn't. This is Sonic Team levels of something I like to call we don't actually know, but we'll sure as hell act like we do. But even then, at least Sonic Team is trying to streamline their lore and make sure that that's just not the case anymore. Because if this was actually the case, you would think any of the NPCs would at the very least mention something as monumental as this, right? Like, I don't know about you, but if I saw a huge tower in the sky 1 second and it was gone the next, I think I'd freak out. I'm saying this with hindsight in mind, of course, but anything would have been a better explanation. And even then, I'd say it again if they gave us another explanation as bad as this one. The thing that really kills it for me is the fact that they felt the need to actually say this in an interview. The fact that we couldn't find an answer in the game itself is downright awful and is something you shouldn't be forced to do. This is a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild. It continues the stories of these characters. We should know what happened to the single most important items from the last games. These things can't just disappear. There's 120 of them and they're all underground. What happened to the massive rooms and trials that were underground? If they were to just disappear, wouldn't that leave massive holes in the ground? Same thing with the Gloom replacing Malice. What the hell happened to Malice? Or at the very least, why was it replaced with Gloom? Wasn't Malice the spawn of Ganon's hatred? In Breath of the Wild, King Rome says that Ganon was born into the kingdom and transformed into Malice. Is Gloom like the evolution of Malice? My belief is that that is exactly the case, but there's really no evidence to support that claim other than me coping my ass off. Even thinking about it in the story doesn't make any sense either, so once again, I'm coping for Nintendo's lack of care when it comes to this game's story. When does this make any sense? If there was an explanation I can get behind in the game itself, I wouldn't be complaining as much, but it really goes to show how much of an afterthought this story was. Even Ganondorf, one of my favorite characters, is reduced to being nothing but a vehicle for evil. In previous Zelda games, Ganondorf was a constant threat. Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, and Twilight, Twilight Princess, no, he's not really there in that one. I mean, at least they use it well for the most part. You want to know something? They're all the same guy. The Zelda timeline is a little confusing if you never played the games before, but basically, Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time is sealed away at the end of the game, and 2 events play out that split into timelines. Well, I mean, there is a third timeline, but Ganondorf doesn't appear, and it's more of a what-if scenario, so we won't talk about that. Link is set back in time to the childhood he missed out on, and the time that continues after he's sent back, which are both named the child and the adult timeline. Fuck, it's hot in this room. When Link is sent back in time to be a kid in the child timeline, he reveals Ganondorf's plan to everyone, which sets him up for execution. Ganondorf from the Wind Waker comes back from his seal, and the goddesses flood the world in the adult timeline since there's no longer a hero who could oppose him. Ganondorf from Twilight Princess of the child timeline was set up for execution, but he got the Triforce of Power just in time and was actually sent to the Twilight Realm. You know, coming back in Twilight Princess, you know, very aptly named game there. There is lore and connections that bring Ganondorf back to his roots in Ocarina of Time. They're all the same guy, and for the longest time, 16 years or so, this was the only version of Ganondorf we've ever had. Ganondorf was always my favorite Zelda character, so I was so excited to see what they would do with him in Tears of the Kingdom, and yeah, you already know the story. He's just evil for the sake of being evil, and it kind of sours the experience. He's also a completely different Ganondorf than the one we've been following for the longest time, but it's also a little confusing because timeline-wise, this is technically the very first Ganondorf from when Demise put on that curse at the end of Skyward Sword, since this is when Hyrule was just founded. Although it begs the question, if Ganondorf was reincarnated, then where is this timeline's Link and Zelda?
Those who share the blood of the goddess and the spirit of the hero, they are eternally bound to this curse. An incarnation of my hatred shall ever follow your kind, dooming them to walk a blood-soaked sea of darkness for all time.
I mean, I guess I can make a pass of some kind for Zelda going back in time, but that doesn't explain Link, and the one in the present doesn't count because Ganondorf was born thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years ago. I mean, if we're talking for all time, then time travel would be a good way to actually see the all time in question, but god no, we spent a whole year polishing the game. I don't know why I said that in a way that makes me sound like I hate polished games. I actually think it's pretty awesome that they actually polished the game for that long. More games should release in a finished state. That shouldn't be a hot take. What was I talking about? Motivations aside, Ganondorf is still a really boring character, and it pains me a lot to see him this way. But the most damning thing of all is that the timeline of events just... They simply don't make a lick of sense whatsoever. Ganondorf's existence this early in the timeline only serves to make things even more confusing for Zelda lore masters like myself, or another term I like to call autism. The official Zelda timeline states that after the events of Skyward Sword, there is an era of prosperity as the Kingdom of Hyrule is formed. Note, this is long after the events of the game, so that means sometime after the people descended into the ground, the Zonai must have shown up to form Hyrule and left for whatever reason. Sometime during this, Ganondorf must have been born into the Gerudo tribe, but note that this is long before any appearance from Ganon or Ganondorf as a character. The first canonical evil to appear in the Zelda timeline after demise is Vati from the Minish Cap and Four Swords. After those two games, we then get our first appearance of Ganondorf, who transforms into Ganon depending on the timeline of events in Ocarina of Time. This raises so many unanswered questions that will most likely go unanswered forever, like why did Ganondorf appear in this time, and if so, why was he never found under Hyrule Castle all of this time? The Sacred Realm existed at this point in time, so why didn't Rauru and the sages seal him there? Why does none of this make canonical sense? Breath of the Wild at the very least has some legroom to operate and move around in the timeline, as it's stated that the game takes place so far in the future, 10,000 years at least, to where any Zelda game before that would have faded into obscurity. It makes references to past games and whatnot, but it's still intentionally vague on where it is in the timeline. Tears of the Kingdom, however, is much more specific than that. Tears is a direct sequel to the previous game, but the story itself takes place after Hyrule's founding, which obviously slots it right between the Minish Cap and Skyward Sword. To be even more specific, it is in the officially named Era of Prosperity. Of course, there wasn't a game taking place during that time yet, so the Era of Prosperity is mostly untouched ground for Zelda, and the founding of Hyrule itself is a very interesting topic. But not only do they do absolutely nothing with it, they go in and screw up the established lore and make things even more confusing. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Nintendo never really cared about the Zelda lore in the first place, so why are you even complaining? Anyone saying that has never played a 3D Zelda game other than Tears of the Kingdom, so that makes them on the same level as Dragon Ball fans. Ignoring the fact that I just brought up a huge Ganondorf lore dump and how it spawned as the same guy through 3 separate games, let's go over some examples of Nintendo taking care of Zelda lore. Every 3D Zelda has references to previous games. Those references date mostly to Ocarina of Time, as Wind Waker and Twilight Princess are sequels to that game, and it's not even context clues either like what we were talking about earlier with Breath of the Wild. No, these are direct references and continuations of lore from previous games. You can go to Ocarina of Time's Hyrule Castle in the Wind Waker as it was flooded over, and when you collect the Master Sword, there are murals of the original sages from that game. Not only that, but it's shown that the Rito and Koroks are direct descendants of the Kokiri and Zora respectively, as they are literally shown in that game. The Great Deku Tree from Wind Waker is confirmed to be the sprout that is spawned after you complete the Forest Temple in Ocarina of Time. The beginning of the game literally recaps Ocarina of Time's events and what happens after. In Twilight Princess, you go visit the Temple of Time from Ocarina of Time and pull out the Master Sword in the exact spot it once was. Link hitting the like and subscribe button in both games. The literal hero of time is in the game and teaches you sword stuff. Once again, Ganondorf is the same exact dude as he once was in the previous games. I know I'm missing something and someone is probably gonna tell me in the comments, but at this point I think you get the picture. Skyward Sword doesn't really have too many references to previous games, as you know, it's a prequel to the entire franchise, so its focus is setting up the future of the series and how the Master Sword was created. A common cope I hear online about Tears' story is that it's a reboot of the franchise and should have had the slate wiped completely clean when going into it. Not only is that blatantly false, it's just fucking stupid thinking. Sorry if I'm coming off as strong or rude here, I just think that it's really dumb because not a single person thought Breath of the Wild was a reboot of the franchise until Tears of the Kingdom came out. Watch, I'm gonna get a comment being like, well, actually, I thought it was a reboot of Breath of the Wild. Shut up, you know what I meant. The reboot theory was never confirmed by Nintendo, nor do I think they had any intention of rebooting the franchise. Breath of the Wild is proof of that, and if I think they were, they would have said something, because rebooting something is a major deal, especially to a game franchise like Zelda. Zelda as a franchise is one of Nintendo's best, right next to Super Mario, and I believe they want to take at least very decent care of it. I feel like I can already hear somebody's comment yelling about me about why I care so much, and I'll tell you why. It's because this game took 6 fucking years to come out. I had been following this game since its first reveal, and I'll tell you, it was a freaking roller coaster. I was 12 when Breath of the Wild came out, and by the time Tears rolled around, I was 19 and working a job at Sherwin-Williams. It's clear that Nintendo was trying something new with Zelda during the Switch area, and Breath of the Wild did an amazing job. It was a great foundation for what could only be built upon from there. But this sequel taking 6 fucking years to make for what is, at the end of the day, a $70 DLC the size of a FromSoft game is unacceptable. If this came out in at least half of the time and I was still in high school, I think I'd be more lenient. But in all of the departments where Tears of the Kingdom could have fumbled on, yeah, it just hurts me the most knowing that the story took like 3 steps back from Breath of the Wild's story, where developers like Monolith Soft only improved on their later titles, taking what worked and throwing out the bad. Nintendo did the opposite and somehow made the story experience so much worse. At least in Breath of the Wild, you knew what was coming at the end of those memories. You knew that the Calamity was going to win and people were going to die, so seeing fragments of those memories were fine because you were aware of where this was going. Tears of the Kingdom actually makes an attempt at a progressing story, but it fumbles because you discover it the exact same way you do in Breath of the Wild. When you really kick off the memory quest in Tears of the Kingdom, you have the option to spoil yourself unknowingly, immediately, by seeing Ganondorf steal the Secret Stone from Sonia and, you know, becoming the Demon King. This is how I first experienced the story, and it was right after I saw the first memory where Zelda found out where she was. The cherry on top of this shit cake is that the lore implications make no sense. Awesome, that'll be $70. At the end of the day, Tears of the Kingdom at the bare minimum does a lot of things right. It's clear that this game is in a vacuum of sorts, and it does have some awesome moments when I view them as such. Ganondorf, while being a very boring character, is still a badass, and the final fight that takes place with him is fucking amazing. While underused to hell and back, I think the Zonai are cool and interesting. I don't have much else to say on them, I just think they're kinda cool. The sealing Ganondorf scene is one of the coldest things Nintendo has ever put out, and when I hear the original theme's motif when Rauru mentions Link, my pants get a little bit tighter.
Years from now, someone will appear with the sword that seals the darkness. A swordsman with the power to defeat you. Link, remember this name.
Link. Interesting. I look forward to meeting you.
Oh, it's happening again. Well, I guess that's all of my ramblings today. Sorry this video took me so long to put out. I just finished upgrading my setup, which ate up all of my weekend and of course my job, but we're back on track to making awesome content for you all. We're actually getting close to hitting 3,000 subscribers, and we can definitely make this video the one that gets us there. I know that was a hard transition to the outro, but I literally have nothing else to talk about, and I don't know how to make a soft transition to end this video. So, yeah, if you want to have a discussion or engage with the community, make sure to take a look at the Nintendo Network. Our co-host DK Matt and Big Sleater are there as well. Yeah, that's about it. Like, subscribe. My name is Dylonic, and I will see you all in the next video. Take it easy and stay fresh.